My name is Kim Barker. I am a reporter with the New York Times right now, but previously I was the South Asia Bureau Chief for the Chicago Tribune for 5 years. I wrote a darkly comic book about my time there called the Taliban Shuffle, and that was made this year into a movie by Tina Fey called Whiskey Tango Foxtrot.
Fantastic. So, as a news reporter, how did you feel or think about the situation in Afghanistan and Pakistan prior to leaving the United States?
You know, it's funny because I had never really traveled anywhere. I mean, I had not even been to Europe before I set foot in Pakistan. So it was nothing I thought about. You know, I remembered seeing, images of the war when the Soviets invaded in Afghanistan, like back when I was a kid. And that was the only context I had. And then, of course, I had post 9/11 context. So when I set foot there, I really didn't know much of anything. And I was just excited about going there. You know, I'd not traveled very much. I grew up in Montana and Wyoming and didn't get my first passport until I was like 29. But the countries I had traveled to were like Jordan and Egypt and Brazil, places that seemed to be different to me, just growing up in middle America.
Okay, so throughout the book, you highlight your conversations with different political figures like Benazir Bhutto. How did speaking to them impact your writing and understanding about the current situation? Well,
I mean, I think talking to leaders is always a fine thing to do in whatever country you're in to understand the context. But those interviews are rare, and it takes a while to be able to build up enough trust in a place to talk to leaders. And a leader is often going to be canned. You know, they're going to know what their message is before they talk to you, and they're going to try to stick on message. And it's rare that you can push somebody off, especially like in a 45-minute interview. But, where you really get a sense of what a country is like is most definitely by talking to average people. And so while I do, use the leaders and experiences I had with the leaders, to sort of, poke fun at the leadership of those countries as well as of our own, as well as foreign journalists. I didn't want to necessarily do that with average people in Pakistan and Afghanistan because I felt like they had suffered enough. So I highlight those interviews just because, it's a good way to talk about what those leaders were doing or not doing in the countries. But I learned much more about the countries from people who actually were, just living there.
So in your book, you discuss your social experiences, including La Atmosphere. Can you share a little bit about how you adjusted or how that changed from being in such an Islamic country to then going to such a Western place?
It was I wanted to write about that experience in the book because it just struck me as so strange. Mm-hmm. And there was such a disconnect between the way Westerners started living in their off time in Afghanistan, and I certainly don't think Afghanistan is alone. I've heard this about other war zones. It's just really different when you contrast the partying scene in a war zone with, various sort of aid workers, diplomats, journalists, NGO workers, security folks, contrasting that with, very sort of Islamic culture of Afghanistan. And the disconnect struck me as something that I really wanted to explore. Because, I do think it's one of the reasons that, we've failed to a certain extent in Afghanistan. And I didn't want to write about that whole Western social life and how much money, people spent on their houses and, this sort of sense of decadence. I did not want to write about that without, acknowledging that I definitely took part because I would be a hypocrite. Mm-hmm. But the government wasn't paying my salary, so it was somehow different, I think. And I just thought it was an interesting thing, for other people to also learn about, because before I went over there, this was the night clothes I packed for going to Afghanistan on my first trip covering the election in 2004. It's hiking boots and baggy jeans and Afghan long shirts. I had no sense that, that there would be any sort of, there would be parties, that there would be restaurants, there would be alcohol even. I just sort of thought I would live a very cloistered life there and do a lot of good stories. So, but you adjusted.
So one of the most important characters in your book was Farouk.
Yes.
But at the end of the book, readers were left hanging. Whatever happened to him?
I know, right? I do love that about giving a speech. I didn't want to say exactly where he was when the book came out, because we didn't know at the time if he was going to get asylum in Canada, and I didn't want to do anything that would jeopardize that. We were, very much working behind the scenes to try to make sure that him and his family got to stay there. But he is in Ottawa. He has 4 kids now. His wife is there as well, obviously, and they have a home, and he's working for the Canadian government, doing like communications in health issues, and we often I got him to come to New York for the premiere of the movie, which took some doing, getting an Afghan man into America. Even though he was being played in the movie. Thank you, Paramount, for helping me with that visa. But, it's just like watching the movie, I think, for us and talking about our old experiences just really makes us miss running around the countryside, and that everything that we got to do and work now seems, not nearly as technicolor as it used to be.
Yeah, and then also for the movie, he didn't seem to be playing such a major role. Was that part of your decision?
Oh, I don't have anything to do with the movie.
Okay.
I mean, it's the way it works, I did not write the screenplay. The way it works when you write a book, if you're really famous, maybe they'll have you, or it was a super knockout fiction bestseller, maybe they'll have you write the screenplay or, help write the screenplay. I didn't have any such pull. They bought the book about 2 weeks after it came out or 1 week after it came out in 2011, but and I met a lot with Robert Carlock, the screenwriter, but I didn't they sent me the screenplay, and they said, okay, here it is, you can't make any changes, and so then I was like, well, if I can't make any changes, I'm not going to read it, because but I didn't have any control over it, so, in other words.
Do you feel like the movie missed that part of it, or?
Well, the movie missed a lot of the book. Yeah. It would have been better if, I liked the movie. I thought they did a good job with the story, but it was just one story contained in a long book that went back and forth between 2 countries and had a lot of experiences in it. And that, by definition, has to be consolidated into an hour and 45-minute movie. It's like Robert also had all these scenes that he was sad were cut, and a lot of them were the sort of, scenes that would have been nice for me to have because they were more along the lines of the book, because there was a lot of fictional interpretation in the movie, obviously. But I think they told a story from the from the book. It's just that, it would probably work really great as a 10-hour Netflix series. And then you can get more into the nuances of the fact that, my reporting in Afghanistan wasn't, I wasn't a TV reporter, first of all. I was a newspaper reporter. And then I didn't necessarily spend all that much time on embeds. I did do some embeds, but most of my time was spent out with the people, And so I think that if there was a long TV series, if anybody watches this from HBO, I'm totally willing to help out with that. But you do what you can do in a movie, and I thought they did a really good job with what they told. And my biggest fear was that it would be like Anchorman in Afghanistan, and it certainly wasn't that. And they honored my 2 major requests, which were to make sure that Farouk wasn't made fun of. I did not want it to make, you know what I mean? It's again, my whole feeling is Afghans and Pakistanis have suffered enough, so I didn't want him to be the butt of jokes unless it was unless you could sort of turn it back. And then I also didn't want the movie to end with my character getting married and having a baby and realizing that all she really needed is love. Because that's what they always do to female adventure stories. And I deliberately wrote a female adventure story that's not about ending in a man, or in love. And I think that even though I was actually dating somebody at the end of the book, because I think that we deserve more adventure stories. Life is more than eat, pray, love. And they did honor both those requests, so.
So after your book was published,
yes,
how has your life changed besides obviously moving back to the States and having the movie?
Yeah, just small things. Well, I definitely get, Penn State asks me to come talk to them. I get a lot more speaking engagements. I use that opportunity to give incredibly boring, lengthy lectures on Afghanistan, so I'm sure that'll be exciting for you guys later today. I gotten to highlight Afghanistan a lot more, and that's what I'm really happy about the movie doing, is because Tina really I mean, and she's so generous. It's like on every single like late night thing she did, she mentioned my name and the original name of the book, is so that the original book started outselling the movie tie-in edition with her face on the cover. And I don't know many celebrities who would do that, who would be so kind to the writer of a book like she was to me, and so just like supportive of other women. And so, you know, but I'm just sort of like, I'm trying to take everything in stride, and like, you know, I'm back to just being a normal Metro reporter for the New York Times, and, you know, that's my job, and I don't really, I mean, it's nothing that I think about, like, or I talk about. It's not like it's changed my life dramatically, you know. I do have a director's chair in my apartment now and a signed movie poster, but that's about it.
So speaking about being a Metro reporter, how does that differ from being a foreign correspondent?
I don't know that it does for me. You know, I think that like I work on a special team that does more investigative stories, so I get a long time to spend on stories. The reason I'm a little bit distracted today is because I wrote this story last year, and the guys I wrote about just got indicted today on the very thing that I wrote about last year, which is, you know, great because it's like it shows that the story was correct. And, you know, but I try to treat New York like you would a foreign country, you know, and like trying to look for really good stories. And we're now trying to cover, you know, everything so that any reader all over the world can glean something about a place from it, right? You know, the future of the New York Times is definitely going to be selling internet copies overseas, which means you don't necessarily cover every single turn of the screw in New York. So I think that like the whole idea of being able to sort of like spot stories that are somehow different that would be interesting to an international audience, I mean, that's a helpful skill anywhere.
Okay, and my final question is, what do you want readers to take away from your book?
Oh God, a sense of despair. I mean, it's funny. It's like I wrote that book so quickly. I wrote that book in a fury. I wrote that book in probably 4 months. I had 7 months to do it, and I swear I procrastinated away 3 of those months by watching things like True Blood. You know, and I was writing like 5,000 words a day at like towards the end, you know, and I was just writing in this fury, and I really wanted to find some sort of way to make people read and learn something about Afghanistan and Pakistan, and actually care about the people over there, you know, and at least care about Farouk, and maybe, you know, my driver in Pakistan, Samad, that's not his real name, that he's actually one of the only people that has a pseudonym because he's still there. And, you know, just realize that, like, I don't know, especially, you know, today, that, you know, just because somebody's Muslim or lives in a different country and there happens to be some terrorism going on over there, it doesn't mean that everybody is a terrorist. And I think that's a message that we need today more than ever.
Okay, well that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.